Good morning, everyone. This morning I'm going to be giving a presentation on how to give presentations. So this presentation is specifically geared on management briefings. So it's a certain style of presentation, a briefing given to management. So I'm assuming as capital project managers, this is something we'll be asked to do fairly often, whether it's to Frank or to Kevin or other senior executives. This is something where we're disseminating information about our projects or a status update. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, we'll all be a little bit more effective at giving management briefings. So the first thing that I want to do is just give you an overview of where we're headed. So the presentation is designed to cover three major points. First, I want to talk about the briefing basics. So what is a briefing? Who is its target audience? What is it designed to do? Then I'm going to talk a little bit about briefing content. So what should you include in your briefing? What are the key elements? And really driving down into what the essentials are that you should cover. The third thing I'm going to do is talk about some presentation mechanics. So this is broad. This is based on all different presentations. What are good do's and don'ts while giving a presentation to be effective? So that's where we're headed. Before I really get into it, I just want to talk that this is just one style of presentation. There are many different types of presentations out there. If you took speech and debate, this would be some of the things, you have your informative, you have your persuasive speech. This is really a presentation, a management briefing is really an informative. So it's about transferring information about your project, about the status of your project. So it's really based on informing. The work we do is really awesome, so maybe you've got a little inspiration in there, or maybe you're going to persuade somebody to give you a little bit more money or more time on your schedule, so there may be elements of that, but really it should be an informative presentation. So effective communication and effective presentation is always audience-centric. So if you're an effective communicator, it's about the recipient and gearing your communication towards your recipient. Same thing with presentations. So you really should think before you start about your presentation, who is your audience? What lens are they approaching you from? So what do they already know? What kind of background information do they have, or what kind of background information do they need to be able to understand your presentation? And then what information do they want? What do they have to tell their boss? What have they asked you for? Sometimes presentations actually have templates that you're supposed to follow. So what information are they asking for, or what matters to them? So you want to think very audience-centric when you're thinking about any presentation. So I am going to ask for some audience participation, even though it's 8:30 in the morning. Who would be the audience for a management briefing? It's a gimme question, so don't think too hard. Who's the audience? Exactly. Management. Frank, I don't have a picture of you up here, but I did that to be nice. I did that to be nice. Exactly. So managers are the audience or the recipient for management briefings. So let's think about our audience. So what is true about a manager's job or their day-to-day? Shout it out. This is participation here.
I get a lot of input.
Busy. That's very similar. Yes. This is actually a calendar of one of our managers in our group. It's back to back with meetings. It's jam-packed. Frank, you can probably relate to that. So busy. What else? Anything else that's true about a manager's position or what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to be involved in projects?
The bigger picture.
What's that?
Bigger picture.
Absolutely. Yep. So I said decision-oriented. That's right. So they're super high level. They can't get down in the weeds. They can't get down in the details to everything. They're intended to be really high level and to be able to provide decisions. So if we get to a point on our projects where we're stuck or we can't get traction, it's gotten higher level than us, we go to them to make a decision or to help move it forward. And the last thing I said is really similar to what Mary said, is they juggle a lot. So you see that calendar, that's probably different meetings. It's probably a million different things that they're handling. Matt, you probably could relate to this about Kevin's schedule. So they've got a lot on their mind. So keep that in mind with your briefing presentation, is you need to bring them into the present of what your project is and give them the background that they might need walking into that. So their questions is, they're walking in the door from another meeting. They may not even know when they're walking into that room, what meeting is this? Who are you? Why am I here? So you really need to set the stage and give them context. So this is a question they might ask. What am I here for and what do you need from me? So they want to come, they want to help, they want projects to be moving forward, but that's something that you need to think about and know to bring them along. So with that in mind, here are the three things that I came up with that are basically the basics of how you want to approach, the mentality you want to have when you approach a briefing. You want it to follow the ABCs. So you want it to be accurate, you want it to be brief, and you want it to be clear. So the accurate part of it is know your facts. So you want to summarize data, and you want to present the main findings or results. So if you have a recommendation to make, have that recommendation ready and have it be accurate. The next thing is actually the title of management briefings is be brief. This is probably one of the most important things that you can do. We as project managers, a lot of us have design backgrounds, a lot of us are technical by trade, so our default might to be go in the weeds and get into the details. If we're living and breathing a project, we know the ins and outs of it, so it can be really hard to be brief. But this is a really target thing for management briefings. You want to get to the really high-level, decision-oriented details. And actually, Frank gave a good D to this ABCD. You do need to know the details, and you probably will if you're working on projects and it's something that you're living and breathing, but you don't bring those details out until asked for. So this should be the findings, the results, the very high level. If you're getting into spreadsheets, if you're getting into 12-point font, if you have 200 slides in your presentation, way too much detail. Keep it really high level. And the third one is be clear. So this is just understanding your audience, knowing that you have to be careful about any sort of jargon or any sort of assumptions that you're making. Be really clear. And this is be really clear about what you're asking. So this is actually a feedback Kevin gave. I told him I was giving a presentation on management briefings. I said, what would you like to hear? What would you like, if we're coming to you, what do you want to know? He said, I want you to say, here's what I'm going to be telling you. But then he also said, I want you to start at the end. I want you to say, what do you need from me? By the end of this, what are you expecting? So that's actually what I'm going to get into next, is the structure of the briefing. So maybe this is familiar to you. This is kind of a common saying when it comes to structuring presentations in general, is tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. So this, for any sort of informative speech, you want to have a roadmap for people to follow. This is that kind of, I'm walking into a new presentation, I'm walking into a new group of people. What am I here for? What are you going to present to me, and what do you want me to know at the end? So set up that structure. This is like that first slide, well, the second slide that I gave you that said, here's where we're going and here's what I'm going to cover. And you want to come back to that at the end of covering it all, so that you can show what you've demonstrated. And then if you have a call to action or a decision point, that's a perfect time to basically round out your argument and ask for feedback. So make sure you set a logical structure. It may seem really clear in your head, but having a structure that other people can identify and latch onto really helps bring the audience or the listener along. Okay, so now we're transitioning into what should you include in your briefing. This is a little bit harder to target because every briefing is going to be a little bit different depending on whether you called it or whether management called it, whether you're asking for approval on something or if it's a status update. But this, it should be very high level and it should be fact oriented. So again, bringing your listener along, you want to start covering any relevant background. And I say relevant background because you could go back to day one and you could say, okay, well, we did this and get lost. Only the relevant pieces that they need to know to understand the presentation that you're giving or the information you're presenting. Secondly, where you are now. Many times we'll do multiple briefings. So we'll have one at the beginning of a project, and then we'll have one after we've gone through alternatives analysis or something, and we're getting buy-off for that next phase. So here's where we are, and here's where we're headed. And then these are kind of the essentials of project management: schedule, scope, and budget. So I included these to say it's likely that you'll want to touch on these. And more so than just touching on these, it would be good if you have presented before or if there was a preliminary estimate to reflect back to that and to show the delta. This is how it's changed since the last time we talked. I was here last May. This is what the original estimate was. Now that we're through pre-design, this is where we stand. That's what they're interested in. Another good thing to talk about would be risks. This would be the politics of a situation, anything that's coming up that could be a hot topic item that they want to have a flag out for. And then I added these other two here. Lessons learned, you could go in a million things of I learned this lesson, I learned this lesson, I learned this lesson. Keep this to what would be relevant to other projects. If they sit and listen to many other projects, they're going to want to know what do we want to look out for on other projects and how can we nip that in the bud if it's been a barrier in the past. So keep it really high level, but it may be a good time to include a lesson learned. And then lastly is barriers. So this would be something that they may be able to help with, like the what do you want from me piece of it. If there's something that you're struggling with, if you're understaffed so the schedule is starting to lag, or if you're in a holding pattern because you're waiting on a decision point, this may be a good time to bring that up if that's something that they may be able to help with. Okay, and now we're getting into the tips and tricks of just presentations in general. So these are just key things that presenters have found over the years are the do's and don'ts on what makes presentations effective. So make eye contact. Active listening usually involves a little bit of head bobbing, people nodding, and eye contact. If you're making eye contact, you're listening and you're going to retain so much more information. So I know a lot of people like to look at a spot back on the wall because it helps with nerves, but look for friendly people in the room that are nodding, that look like they're understanding your presentation. Exactly. And make sure to make eye contact because that's an important part of getting the message across. Use photos and numbers. So Death by PowerPoint is the 12-point font of just slide after slide of information. This really helps people capture it and remember it is if you have numbers, if you have charts, if you have graphics. So use photos and numbers as much as possible. And don't say exactly what you're saying on the slide. Have the bullet points of what you're saying. Your speech should really be the focal point of the presentation. And I hope I've been following this. Probably not, but speak slowly. It takes much more time to understand something and to bring your audience along than you might think. When our nerves go up, our rate of speaking goes up at the same rate, I guess. And so remember to take a deep breath and speak slowly. It'll make you look more confident and it'll help your audience keep track with you. So the don'ts. This goes back to the ABCs. Don't go over time. Ask what your time limit is or ask how long your presentation is supposed to take and stick to it. And the only way that the two tips I have for this is look at your slide count. If you have a 15-minute presentation and you have 40 slides, unless you have something cool where you're carouseling through photos, that's probably too many. So minute per slide is a pretty good rule. Also, time yourself. I don't know of any other better way to be able to figure out if you're going to hit your time limit than to actually time yourself and see how you do. If you go 5 minutes over, it's likely you may go long in your presentation. Give time for questions, end early, respect the manager's schedule. Fidget. Don't fidget. Less is more. When we get nervous, the energy comes out of us by pacing, doing little tics that we didn't realize we had, if we've got one of these, all of a sudden your pen becomes a drumstick, you just kind of have to get that energy out somewhere. Less is more. You will come off much more composed and much more in control if you try to keep it to a minimum and keep your body movements low. And the last one is don't overload slides. So this is something we've all been a part of. It's one presentation after another of bullet points and it's all small font. Way too much information to take in at once. So does anyone want to take a guess at what font size this is? The overload slides. Just take a shot.
48.
Yes, 48. Yep. So this is 48 and this is 30. So 30 is about as small as it might be 36, but that's about as small as you want to get, and you don't want a lot of that. So if you really have main points, you want them to be bigger font and you want much less of it. So that's really the end of it here. We talked about briefing basics, so who the target audience for a briefing is, how to think from an audience-centric standpoint, and to be accurate, to be brief, and to be clear. Briefing content, what are the key things that you should hone in on the essentials of your briefing? And lastly, the tips and tricks for presentations, what to do and what not to do. That concludes my presentation on how to give effective management briefings. I hope this presentation provided you with some useful insight and tools to use at your next briefing. Thanks for listening.